What happens when the man who swore to protect you decides you're no longer worth his time? Ronan Vance thought he had it all figured out. He was the rising star of corporate acquisitions, ruthlessly leaving behind his quiet, unremarkable wife for a life of luxury and prestige. When he slid the divorce papers across the mahogany table, he was certain he'd won. He kept the assets, the status, and his golden future. But Ronan made one fatal miscalculation. His docile wife, Sable, was hiding a secret that would bring his entire world crashing down. Welcome to a story of absolute betrayal, devastating karma, and unimaginable power. The conference room of Harrison, Vance, and Caldwell smelled of ozone, fresh leather, and the distinct metallic tang of finalized destruction. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the gray expanse of the Chicago skyline, mirroring the cold sterility of the room. Ronan Vance checked his Rolex Daytona, a gift to himself for making junior partner, for the third time in 10 minutes. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke navy Tom Ford suit, feeling the satisfying weight of the silk. Across the vast expanse of the polished mahogany table sat Sable. She looked exactly as she had for the last 5 years, unremarkable. She wore a simple, oatmeal-colored wool sweater that swallowed her slight frame, her dark hair pulled back into a loose, messy knot at the nape of her neck. No makeup, no jewelry, save for the modest diamond engagement ring and the plain gold band she was about to forfeit. She looked like a woman who belonged in a suburban library, not in the high-stakes world Ronan was rapidly conquering. If we could direct our attention to page 42, Section C, droned Arthur Harrison, Ronan's high-priced divorce attorney. Harrison was a shark in a pinstripe suit, a man who specialized in ensuring ambitious men didn't lose their fortunes to starter wives. Sable didn't look at the document. Her dark eyes, usually warm and deferential, were fixed on Ronan. There was a quiet intensity in them today, a stillness that made the back of Ronan's neck prickle. He brushed the feeling away. It was just grief, he told himself. She was losing him. Of course, she was devastated. Section C outlines the division of the Oak Park property, Harrison continued, his voice slick. Mr. Vance has generously agreed to let Mrs. Vance retain the residence, along with a lump sum settlement of $200,000, provided she waives any right to his future earnings, pensions, or equity at Vanguard Acquisitions. Furthermore, the standard non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses apply. Ronan leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He tried to arrange his handsome features into an expression of compassionate regret. Sable, I want you to be comfortable. The house is paid off. The settlement will give you a cushion while you figure out your freelance writing, or whatever it is you want to do next. It's more than fair. He waited for the tears. He waited for the pleading. Throughout their 6-year marriage, Sable had always been the emotional anchor, the one who compromised, the one who stayed up late typing his grad school papers and making him coffee while he clawed his way up the corporate ladder. She had been a good foundation, but foundations belong underground. Ronan belonged in the penthouse. He needed a partner who could navigate gala dinners, charm CEOs, and wear couture with ease. He needed Ilara. Sable didn't cry. She didn't blink. She simply looked down at the thick stack of papers. My future earnings are poised to triple in the next quarter, Ronan added, a hint of impatience bleeding through his curated calm. This clean break is the best way for both of us to move on without litigation dragging out for years. I'm giving you a massive head start. A head start, Sable repeated softly. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping across pavement. You think you're giving me a head start, Ronan? I'm trying to be equitable, Sable. We've grown apart. My world has expanded, and you, Well, you prefer the quiet life. There's no shame in that. But we don't fit anymore. Sable picked up the Mont Blanc pen, resting beside the documents. It was heavy, cold. She rolled it between her thumb and forefinger. For a fleeting second, a memory flashed behind her eyes. Ronan, 5 years ago, standing in their cramped studio apartment, crying into her shoulder after failing his first major licensing exam. "I'm nothing without you, Sabs," he had whispered. "I'll build an empire for us, I promise." He had built an empire, all right, just not for them. "You're right," Sable said, her voice eerily calm. "Your world has expanded." She didn't read the clauses. She didn't ask her own court-appointed attorney a single question. She flipped to the back page, uncapped the pen, and signed her name with a fluid, elegant flourish. Sable Vance. For the last time. Harrison looked momentarily stunned. He had prepared for a bloodbath, for demands of alimony and asset audits. He exchanged a triumphant, albeit confused glance with Ronan. "Done," Sable said, capping the pen and placing it gently on the table. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her wool sweater. "The house is yours, Ronan. Keep the 200,000. I don't want a dime of your money." Ronan frowned, standing up as well. "Sable, don't be dramatic. Take the settlement. You can't survive on a freelance copywriter's salary." "I'll manage," she said quietly. She picked up her worn leather satchel. She looked at him one last time, and for a terrifying second, Ronan didn't see the meek, supportive wife he had outgrown. He saw something ancient, cold, and profoundly powerful in her gaze. It was a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "Goodbye, Ronan," she whispered. "I hope you get exactly what you've earned." Without another word, she walked out of the conference room. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing the end of their marriage. Ronan exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. A massive, euphoric wave of relief washed over him. He had done it. He had excised the dead weight without losing a single share of his Vanguard stock. He walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling city. He owned this town, and now he was entirely free to conquer it. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Elara? It's done." She signed everything. "Put the champagne on ice, darling. We've won." 2 months later, the memory of Sable was nothing more than a minor speed bump in Ronan's rearview mirror. His life was a dizzying blur of Michelin-starred dinners, private black car services, and late nights at the Vanguard acquisitions offices. His new fiancée, Elara Croft, was everything Sable was not. Elara was a razor-sharp art dealer with a pedigree that traced back to the Mayflower. She wore asymmetrical designer dresses, spoke fluent French to sommeliers, and knew exactly which pressure points to press in Chicago's high society to elevate Ronan's status. They stood together on the balcony of Elara's, now their Gold Coast penthouse, the city lights glittering below them like scattered diamonds. Elara was trailing a manicured finger down the lapel of his tuxedo. "You're nervous," she purred, taking a sip of her crisp Sancerre. "I can feel your heart hammering." "It's not nerves, Elle," Ronan said, pulling her close. "It's adrenaline. Tomorrow is the apex. If I close the Sterling Global Logistics merger, the senior partners aren't just giving me a corner office. They're giving me a seat on the board. I'll be the youngest managing partner in Vanguard's history." Elara smiled, her dark red lipstick striking against her porcelain skin. "Sterling Global, the white whale. Everyone has tried to buy a piece of their supply chain. How did you manage to get a meeting when half of Wall Street gets ignored?" Ronan puffed his chest out slightly. "I found a vulnerability. Sterling's founder, Arthur Sterling, has been ill. Rumor has it he's stepping down, and there's a power vacuum. The board is terrified because the sole heir, some daughter he's kept hidden from the press her entire life, is supposedly a complete novice, an eccentric who has nothing to do with the business. I leveraged a connection with their CFO to pitch a buyout of their European shipping lanes before the daughter takes over and tanks the stock. A hidden heir? Elara laughed softly, a sharp, cynical sound. How dramatic. Some spoiled trust fund brat who probably spends her days doing yoga in Bali while Daddy runs the empire. Exactly, Ronan agreed, staring out at the skyline. They need Vanguard's infrastructure to stabilize their European markets, and they know it. It's a hostile takeover dressed up as a friendly merger. By tomorrow afternoon, I'll hold the keys to a $10 billion logistics network. He felt invincible. Every choice he had made, no matter how ruthless, had led him to this exact moment. Shedding Sable had been the final, necessary shedding of his mediocre past. He needed to be lean, unencumbered, and predatory. The next morning, Ronan walked into the Vanguard offices like a conquering gladiator. His team, 3 sharp-suited analysts and a ruthless junior litigator named Davies, trailed behind him as they prepared the final pitch decks. "The Sterling team is arriving at 2 p.m., Davies reported, handing Ronan an iPad. "Their CFO, Marcus Vance, is leading the delegation. Still no word on whether Arthur Sterling will make an appearance." "He won't," Ronan said confidently, checking his reflection in the glass walls of the elevator. "The man is practically on his deathbed, and the mysterious daughter won't show either. She leaves the dirty work to the executives. We push hard on the European inefficiencies. Make them feel like Vanguard is their only lifeline." At 1:45 p.m., Ronan and his team settled into the grand, glass-walled boardroom of Vanguard. The table was set with sparkling water and thick, glossy portfolios. Ronan sat at the head of the table, his posture radiating absolute dominance. He thought briefly of his divorce signing 2 months ago. The contrast was poetic. Then he had been shedding his past. Today he was claiming his future. He checked his Rolex. 1:55 p.m. The silence in the room was electric, heavy with anticipation. "They're here," Davies whispered, glancing at his phone. "Front desk says the Sterling delegation is coming up." Ronan stood, buttoning his jacket. "Showtime, gentlemen. Let's gut them." Miles away, and a lifetime apart from the sterile ambition of Vanguard acquisitions, Sable stood in the cavernous, wood-panelled study of the Sterling estate in Connecticut. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and the faint, antiseptic odor of a medical ventilator. Arthur Sterling, a man who had built a global logistics and technology empire from a single cargo ship in 1980, sat in a leather wingback chair. He looked frail, his skin papery and pale, but his eyes, the exact same dark, piercing shade as his daughter's, were burning with a fierce, unyielding light. Sable stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling, manicured grounds. She was no longer wearing the oversized wool sweaters or the faded jeans of Sable Vance, freelance writer. She wore a tailored, charcoal grey Alexander McQueen suit that armored her body like steel. Her dark hair was sleek, straightened, and cut into a sharp bob that framed her cheekbones. The transformation was not just physical, it was molecular. The gentle, accommodating woman who had brewed Ronan's coffee and absorbed his neglect was gone. In her place stood the sole heir. "You look like your mother," Arthur rasped, adjusting the nasal cannula that fed him oxygen. "Fierce, unforgiving." "I am unforgiving," Sable said quietly, turning to face him. "I thought I could hide from it, Dad. I thought if I just lived a normal life, found a normal man, I could escape the weight of the Sterling name. I wanted someone to love me for me. Not for the Empire. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. A noble delusion, my dear. But power is gravity. You can pretend you don't feel it, but it controls the tides all the same. This boy, Ronan. He thought he was the sun, didn't he? He thought you were just a rock caught in his orbit. Sable's jaw tightened. He filed for divorce, kept the settlement low to protect his future assets. He told me he was outgrowing me. The pain of the memory still flared, a dull ache beneath her ribs. She had truly loved Ronan. She had loved the hungry, desperate boy he used to be. She had hidden her identity because she knew what immense wealth did to people. It warped them, turned them into sycophants or monsters. She had wanted to build something authentic. But the higher Ronan climbed, the more the corporate world poisoned him. He had become arrogant, cold, and cruel. He hadn't just stopped loving her. He had discarded her like obsolete machinery. And now? Arthur asked, watching her intently. Vanguard Acquisitions is making a play for our European division. Your ex-husband is spearheading the assault. He thinks I'm a dying lion, and he thinks my daughter is a ghost. Sable walked over to the heavy mahogany desk and picked up the Vanguard merger proposal. She flipped through Ronan's aggressive restructuring plans. It was arrogant work, sloppy in its overconfidence. He's right about one thing, Sable said, her voice dropping to a low, icy register. I was a ghost. But ghosts haunt the people who killed them. Arthur smiled, a terrifying expression on his withered face. Are you ready to take the seat, Sable? Once you walk into that boardroom today, the masquerade is over. The world will know who you are. You will never be ordinary again. Sable looked down at her bare left hand. The pale indentation of her wedding ring had finally faded. I don't want to be ordinary anymore, Dad. I want to be the CEO of Sterling Global. Then go to Chicago, Arthur commanded, his voice suddenly thick with the booming authority that had terrorized boardrooms for 4 decades. Go to Chicago, look that arrogant boy in the eye, and show him what a real empire looks like. Break him, Sable. Not for breaking your heart, but for insulting our intelligence. Sable picked up her leather briefcase. It wasn't the worn satchel she had carried into the divorce proceedings. It was structured, black, and impenetrable. I'll see you tonight, Dad, she said. She walked out of the study, her heels clicking like gunshots against the marble floors of the hallway. Outside, a black Maybach was idling on the driveway, flanked by 2 imposing security details. As she slid into the back seat, she pulled out her phone and sent a single text to Marcus, her CFO. I am taking the lead on the Vanguard meeting. Do not announce my arrival. Let them think they hold the room. As the car sped toward the private airstrip, Sable looked out the tinted windows. She wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot and chaotic. What she felt was absolute, sub-zero clarity. Ronan Vance wanted to play at being a god in the corporate world. It was time he met the devil. The heavy glass doors of Vanguard's main conference room swung open. Ronan stood up instantly, flashing his most brilliant, predatory smile. Marcus, a pleasure to finally have you on our turf, he boomed, extending a hand to the silver-haired CFO of Sterling Global, who walked in first. Behind Marcus came 2 senior legal counsels from Sterling, looking grim and professional. Mr. Vance, Marcus said neutrally, shaking Ronan's hand. The CFO didn't take a seat. He remained standing near the door. Ronan frowned slightly, his smile faltering a millimeter. Is everything all right, Marcus? Please have a seat. We have a comprehensive presentation regarding the European shipping asset liquidation. "There has been a slight change in the itinerary, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the large room. "Arthur Sterling's health has necessitated an immediate transition of power. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the board of directors has officially appointed the new CEO of Sterling Global. She will be handling all acquisition and merger negotiations moving forward." A ripple of surprise went through Ronan's team. Davies looked nervously at his iPad. Ronan, however, recovered instantly. He buttoned his suit jacket, his confidence swelling. A new CEO. The inexperienced, hidden daughter. This was even better. She would be naive, easily overwhelmed by jargon and aggressive posturing. "Excellent," Ronan said smoothly. "We welcome the new CEO. Vanguard is thrilled to be her first major partnership. Is she joining us via conference call?" "No," a voice said from the corridor. It was a quiet voice, but it carried a harmonic frequency that made the hairs on Ronan's arms stand up. It was a voice he had heard in the dark, a voice that had whispered to him in bed, a voice that had softly agreed to take nothing in a cold law office 2 months ago. The security detail stepped aside. Sable walked into the room. Ronan's brain instantly short-circuited. He stared at her, his eyes uncomprehending. He saw the charcoal Alexander McQueen suit. He saw the sharp, flawless hair. He saw the posture, rigid with terrifying authority. He blinked, expecting the hallucination to vanish, but she kept walking, past Marcus, past the Sterling lawyers, until she reached the exact opposite end of the long boardroom table. She placed her black briefcase on the table. Click, click. The latch's opening sounded like a guillotine resetting. "Sable," Ronan breathed, the word slipping out like a gasp. Davies, sensing the massive shift in gravity but lacking the context, leaned over to Ronan. "Sir, who is this?" Sable looked up. Her dark eyes locked onto Ronan's. There was no love in them. There was no grief. There was only the dead, flat gaze of an apex predator looking at its prey. "Gentlemen," Sable said, her voice commanding the acoustics of the room effortlessly. "I am Sable Sterling, CEO and majority shareholder of Sterling Global. Please, sit down." Ronan's knees gave out. He fell back into his leather chair, the impact jolting his spine. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of grey. Sable Sterling. The words echoed in his skull, tearing apart his reality piece by piece. His quiet, unremarkable wife. The woman he had discarded for being a peasant in his royal court. She wasn't just wealthy. She owned the board he was trying to sit on. There must be some mistake, Ronan stammered, his polished, silver-tongued arrogance evaporating into raw panic. He looked at Marcus. "This is Sable Vance, my ex-wife. She's a freelance writer." "I was," Sable corrected smoothly, taking her seat. "I found the work incredibly fulfilling, but family obligations have called me away. Now, Mr. Vance, I believe you called this meeting to discuss the hostile acquisition of my European shipping lanes." Ronan's chest heaved. He couldn't breathe. The walls of his triumphant kingdom were collapsing inward, crushing him. He looked at his presentation on the monitor. The aggressive, condescending slides designed to bully a failing company. He was trying to bully a billionaire empire owned by the woman whose heart he had broken. "Sable, what is this?" Ronan whispered, the professional facade completely shattered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "This is a business meeting, Mr. Vance," Sable said, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "We will keep it strictly professional. I have reviewed your proposal." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out his thick, glossy Vanguard pitch deck. She didn't open it. She simply slid it across the long mahogany table. It stopped an inch from Ronan's trembling hands. Your valuation of our European assets is insulting, Sable continued, leaning forward, steepling her fingers exactly as Ronan had done in the divorce lawyer's office. Your infrastructure is outdated, and Vanguard's liquid capital is leveraged too high to absorb our operational costs. You aren't offering a lifeline, Mr. Vance. You're a parasite trying to latch onto a healthy host to save your own failing quarterly margins. Davies, the junior litigator, bristled. What was it all called, Miss Sterling? With all due respect, our analytics show your European division is bleeding out. Sable didn't even look at Davies. She kept her eyes locked on Ronan. Speak to your dog, Mr. Vance, before I have him removed. Ronan flinched. He held up a shaking hand, silencing Davies. Sable, Ms. Sterling, please, let's discuss this rationally. I am entirely rational, Sable said. In fact, I am being generous. 2 months ago, you told me I needed a head start. Now I'm giving Vanguard one. The merger is dead. Sterling Global is pulling all pending contracts with Vanguard Acquisitions, effective immediately. Furthermore, we will be launching an aggressive expansion into domestic acquisitions. We will be directly competing with your firm in every sector. Ronan felt the room spinning. If Sterling pulled out, the merger failed. If the merger failed, he didn't just lose the board seat. The senior partners would crucify him. He would be fired. He would lose the penthouse, the status, everything. You can't do this, Ronan choked out, a cold sweat breaking over his forehead. You're mixing personal grievances with business. This is retaliation. Sable tilted her head, a cold, empty smile touching her lips. Retaliation? Don't flatter yourself, Ronan. You're not important enough to retaliate against. You're just a bad investment I'm finally writing off. I gave you the house. I gave you your clean break. But I keep the future. She stood up. The meeting had lasted less than 5 minutes. We're done here, Sable said to Marcus. She turned and walked toward the door. Ronan scrambled out of his chair, desperation making him clumsy. He chased after her, grabbing the heavy glass door before her security could shut it. Sable, wait! Please! He begged, his voice cracking, completely oblivious to his stunned colleagues watching him unravel. We can fix this. We can talk about this. I made a mistake. Sable paused in the hallway. She turned to look at him, her eyes tracing the panic on his handsome face, the sweat ruining the collar of his Tom Ford suit. You didn't make a mistake, Ronan, she whispered softly, so only he could hear. You made a choice. And so did I. Tell Ilara I love her taste in penthouses. I just bought the building. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor, leaving Ronan standing in the ruins of the empire he thought he had built. Ronan Vance thought the worst was over after his ex-wife revealed she was the billionaire CEO of the company he was trying to acquire. But the nightmare has only just begun. Stripped of his leverage and humiliated in front of his peers, Ronan is about to discover that hell hath no fury like a woman who owns the very ground you walk on. As Sable settles into her throne at Sterling Global, she launches a ruthless, methodical campaign to dismantle every single piece of Ronan's perfect new life. Will Ronan find a way to strike back, or is he about to learn that his entire self-made empire was built on a lie? Welcome back to part 2 of our story of betrayal and corporate warfare. The descent in the private Vanguard Acquisitions elevator was the longest 70 seconds of Ronan Vance's life. Beside him, Davies, the junior litigator, was pale and sweating, staring fixedly at the changing floor numbers as if they were a countdown to an execution. The silence in the mahogany-paneled car was deafening, heavy with the phantom echo of Sable's footsteps walking away. Ronan felt entirely untethered from reality. The physical symptoms of panic, a racing heart, shallow breaths, a cold, prickling sensation spreading across his scalp, were alien to him. He was a man who thrived on control, on being the smartest predator in the room. But how could he have known? How could the woman who spent her weekends knitting, throws, and baking sourdough bread be the sole beneficiary of a $10 billion logistics monopoly? The elevator chimed at the 70th floor, breaking the trance. "Sir?" Davies croaked, his voice cracking. What do we tell Elias?" Elias Vanguard, the senior founding partner, the man who held Ronan's promotion and his entire future in his liver-spotted hands. Ronan swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He straightened his tie with trembling fingers. "We tell him the truth. The Sterling board executed an unexpected leadership pivot. We regroup. We pivot with them. It was a lie, and they both knew it." 10 minutes later, Ronan stood before the massive, custom-built oak desk of Elias Vanguard. The elder man didn't invite Ronan to sit. Elias was looking at a live market ticker on his monitor, his expression carved from granite. "I just received a call from Marcus, the CFO of Sterling Global," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that sent a chill down Ronan's spine. "He informed me that not only is the European merger dead, but Sterling is permanently blacklisting this firm. Furthermore, he mentioned that the new CEO found your personal history with her to be a conflict of interest." Elias finally looked up, his pale blue eyes pinning Ronan to the floor. "You brought a domestic dispute into my boardroom, Vance. You tried to hostile take over your own ex-wife without knowing who she was." "Elias, sir, I swear to you, she kept her identity hidden," Ronan pleaded, the polished veneer cracking. "She lived a double life. I had no idea she was Arthur Sterling's daughter. If you had known, you wouldn't be standing here looking like a fool who just played a high-stakes poker game with his cards facing outward," Elias interrupted, slamming a hand onto the desk. The loud crack made Ronan flinch. "I don't care about your marital drama. I care that you just cost this firm a $10 billion lifeline. I care that Sterling Global is now actively restructuring to poach our domestic clients. I can fix this," Ronan said desperately. "I know how she thinks. I was married to her for 6 years. She's emotional. She's lashing out. Give me a week to open back channels." "You don't know a damn thing about how she thinks," Elias sneered. "She didn't just walk out of that room, Vance. She decapitated you in front of your own team. You are a liability. Your promotion is revoked, effective immediately. You are suspended from all partner track activities. Clear your desk. You're going on indefinite administrative leave." "Elias, please, get out of my office, Ronan, before I decide to fire you for gross negligence." Ronan stumbled out of the executive suite, his vision swimming. The bullpen of analysts who had worshipped him just an hour ago now avoided his gaze, furiously typing at their keyboards. He was a ghost. An hour later, Ronan unlocked the heavy door of the Gold Coast penthouse. The sweeping views of Lake Michigan, usually a source of immense pride, now felt mocking. The vast expanse of the city belonged to Sable now. Elara was in the kitchen, pouring 2 flutes of vintage crystal. She wore a sleek, pearl-white silk slip dress, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. She turned, a triumphant smile on her red lips. "Well," she purred, "did you gut the trust fund, brat? Tell me the board seat is officially yours." Ronan dropped his briefcase onto the marble island. It sounded hollow. He looked at Elara, suddenly struck by how sharp and angular she was. There was no softness to her, no comfort. "The merger failed," Ronan said, his voice dead. Elara's smile vanished instantly. The champagne bottle clinked against the counter. "Failed? What do you mean, failed?" Ronan, you promised me this was a lock. My gallery expansion is leveraging this promotion. The new CEO of Sterling Global, Ronan continued, staring blankly at the wall behind her. It's Sable. Elara blinked, her perfectly manicured brow furrowing in confusion. Sable? Your mousy little ex-wife, Sable? The freelance writer? She's Arthur Sterling's sole heir. She hid it. The whole time. Ronan ran a shaking hand through his hair, a hysterical broken laugh escaping his lips. She didn't want my settlement money because she's worth billions, Elle. She walked into the boardroom, killed the deal, and then told me she bought this building. Elara stared at him, the colour draining from her face. But it wasn't sympathy that washed over her features. It was absolute, visceral horror. She didn't walk over to comfort him. She didn't put a hand on his shoulder. Instead, she took a step back, calculating the immediate damage to her own social and financial standing. You were married to a Sterling, Elara whispered, her voice tightening into a hiss. You were married to one of the richest women in North America, and you divorced her for a $200,000 payout and a house in the suburbs? You idiot! Ronan's head snapped up. Excuse me. You had the golden goose, Ronan. You had the key to the entire kingdom, and you threw her away because she didn't wear designer labels. Elara slammed her champagne flute down. And now she owns the building I live in? You have made me a target in a war I didn't sign up for. I didn't know! Ronan yelled, the betrayal stinging far worse than he expected. I need you on my side right now, Elara. Elias just suspended me. Elara's eyes went completely cold. It was a look of pure, transactional self-preservation. I'm going to the Hamptons for the weekend, she said quietly. I need space. You need to figure out how to fix this, Ronan, because I refuse to go down with your ship. As she turned and walked toward the master bedroom, Ronan stood alone in the cavernous, silent penthouse. The chill of the marble floor seeped through his shoes. For the first time in his life, he realized how utterly alone he was. The regional headquarters of Sterling Global occupied the top 20 floors of a black glass skyscraper overlooking the Chicago River. The environment was the antithesis of Vanguard's aggressive, hyper-modern sterility. Sterling was old money, rich mahogany, subdued lighting, priceless maritime antiques, and a quiet hum of unimaginable, generational power. Sable sat at the head of a massive oval table in the executive boardroom. She wore a deep emerald green blazer that contrasted sharply with the stark white of her silk blouse. Her posture was flawless. There was no trace of the woman who used to apologize when the barista got her coffee order wrong. Surrounding her were the 12 members of the Sterling Board of Directors. Most were men in their 60s and 70s, veterans of industry who had fought in the trenches alongside her father, Arthur, and most of them were currently looking at her with a mixture of veiled skepticism and polite condescension. Sable, my dear, began Victor Thorne, the chief operating officer. He was a silver-haired man with a perpetual smirk, acting as the unofficial spokesperson for the old guard. We are, of course, devastated by Arthur's declining health, but we must be pragmatic. The unilateral decision to kill the Vanguard merger has caused unease. We need the European logistics stabilization. Acting out of, shall we say, personal vendettas is not sound fiscal policy. Sable didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, forcing Victor to sit in the awkwardness of his own patronizing tone. She pulled a sleek tablet toward her, her eyes scanning the data before looking back at him. Personal vendetta? Sable asked, her voice low, steady, and devoid of emotion. Is that what you call cutting off a parasitic appendage, Victor? Victor bristled. Vanguard offered premium infrastructure. Vanguard offered a facade of infrastructure, Sable cut in, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. She tapped the screen, projecting a massive spreadsheet onto the wall monitor behind her. I have spent the last 3 years anonymously auditing every subsidiary Vanguard has attempted to acquire. They operate on a model of leveraged debt. They buy failing companies, strip them of their assets, fire the workforce, and artificially inflate their stock price before the shell collapses. If we merged our European lanes with them, we would be assuming $3 billion of hidden toxic debt within 36 months. The room fell dead silent. The board members leaned forward, squinting at the complex, deeply buried financial data Sable had just exposed, data Vanguard had expertly hidden from them. Furthermore, Sable continued, turning her dark, predatory gaze fully onto Victor, I find it fascinating that you were pushing so aggressively for this merger, Victor, considering your brother-in-law sits on the board of a shell corporation that heavily shorts Vanguard stock. A merger would have provided a temporary surge, allowing him to cash out at a premium before the inevitable crash. Victor's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. You aren't just sloppy, Victor. You're compromised, Sable said coldly. My father kept you around because of nostalgia. I do not suffer from that affliction. You have 3 minutes to clear your desk. Your severance package has already been emailed to your personal account. Security will escort you out. A collective, quiet gasp went around the table. In less than 2 minutes, Sable had dismantled one of the most powerful men in the company, using nothing but raw data and absolute ruthlessness. The grandfatherly indulgence they had felt toward her vanished, replaced by a deep, primal fear. Arthur Sterling wasn't dead yet, but his ghost was already sitting at the head of the table. Victor stood up, his hands shaking, and left the room without a single word of defense. Sable didn't watch him leave. She turned to Marcus, her CFO, who was failing to hide a deeply satisfied smirk. Marcus, Sable said, the business returning to her tone seamlessly. Vanguard is weak. The failed merger will cause their stock to dip by end of day. I want to launch an aggressive, hostile domestic expansion. Target their top 3 manufacturing clients in the Midwest. Undercut their shipping rates by 20%. 20%? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Sable will be operating those routes at a loss for the first 2 quarters. It's not a loss, Marcus. It's an investment in Vanguard's destruction, Sable replied calmly. We bleed them of their client base until their margins are so thin they turn on each other. I want Vanguard acquisitions begging for bankruptcy by Christmas. As the board meeting adjourned and the executives filed out, quietly murmuring their newfound terrifying respect for the sole heir, Sable remained seated. She looked out the window at the sprawling city. For years she had watched Ronan look out at this exact skyline with hungry, desperate eyes, wanting to own it. He had sacrificed her on the altar of his ambition. He had thought power was loud, flashy, and arrogant. He was wrong. Real power was silent. It was the ability to rewrite reality with a stroke of a pen. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from her real estate acquisitions manager. The paperwork for the Gold Coast penthouse building has cleared. We are the legal owners. Sable allowed a slow, dangerous smile to curve her lips. Checkmate, Ronan, she whispered to the empty room. 2 weeks felt like a lifetime in the freefall of Ronan Vance. His administrative leave had effectively turned him into a pariah. His emails went unanswered. His calls to the Vanguard partners were routed to voicemail. He spent his days sitting in the massive, quiet penthouse, watching his Vanguard stock options plummet as Sterling Global systematically poached their biggest clients. Every time Ronan turned on CNBC, there was a new headline about Sterling's aggressive domestic expansion. The Iron Heir, the media had dubbed Sable. There were no photos of her. She maintained her strict privacy, but her presence was a suffocating blanket over Ronan's entire existence. Ilara had returned from the Hamptons, but she brought a glacial chill with her. They moved around the penthouse like hostile ghosts, avoiding each other. Ilara was busy making frantic phone calls, trying to secure her gallery's future as her vanguard-tied investors began pulling out of her upcoming modern art exhibition. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the heavy brass knocker on the penthouse door echoed through the foyer. Ronan opened it to find a courier in a crisp uniform. The courier handed him a thick, manila envelope, sealed with a wax crest, the sterling global emblem. Ronan's stomach dropped. He carried the envelope to the kitchen island, his hands trembling slightly as he tore it open. It was a formal legal notice from Sterling Properties Management. Dear Mr. Vance, please be advised that upon review of the tenant agreements for the Gold Coast property, we have exercised the Luxury Lease Reassessment Clause, Section 4, Paragraph B. Effective on the 1st of next month, the monthly rent for Penthouse Unit 1 will be increased by 400%, reflecting current hypermarket valuations. Should you choose to decline the new terms, consider this your official 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Ronan stared at the paper, his vision blurring. A 400% increase. It was astronomical. It was designed to be impossible to pay, especially with him suspended without pay from Vanguard. "What is that?" Ilara demanded, walking into the kitchen. She wore a silk robe, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She looked stressed, the delicate skin around her eyes tight. Ronan couldn't speak. He just slid the paper across the marble counter. Ilara read it, her eyes widening. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped her throat. 400%. She's evicting us. Your pathetic, mousy little ex-wife is throwing us out onto the street. It's a power play, Ronan rasped, trying to find his footing. I can fight this in court. The reassessment clause. You can't afford a lawyer to fight Sterling Global Ronan, Ilara snapped, her voice shrill. She threw the paper back at him. Do you have any idea what happened to me today? My primary shipping contractor for the Paris sculptures just dropped me. Said they had an exclusive domestic contract conflict. Care to guess who they just signed with? Ronan closed his eyes. Sterling. Everything is Sterling, Ilara screamed, finally losing her curated composure. She's suffocating me, Ronan. I am losing investors. I am losing my logistics. And now I am losing my home. Because of you. Because you were too arrogant to realize who you were sleeping next to for 6 years. I thought I was building a life for us, Ronan yelled back, his own rage finally boiling over. I thought I was doing what it took to get to the top. You didn't get to the top, Ronan. You just painted a target on your back and dragged me into the crosshairs. Ilara turned away, marching toward the bedroom. I am not moving into some secondary-tier apartment because you messed up your divorce. I'm calling Charles. He offered me a stay at his townhouse in Lincoln Park. Charles was a rival art dealer. Older, wealthier, and entirely insulated from the Vanguard fallout. You're leaving? Ronan asked, the sheer speed of her betrayal stunning him. Just like that? When things get difficult? Ilara paused at the bedroom door, looking back at him with absolute contempt. I fell in love with a managing partner, Ronan, a man who owned the city, not a suspended liability who is being hunted for sport by his ex-wife. I don't do sinking ships. The door slammed shut. Ronan stood perfectly still. The silence of the penthouse was crushing. He thought back to his cramped studio apartment with Sable 5 years ago. He had failed his licensing exam. He was broke, depressed, and ready to quit. Sable hadn't left him. She had held him, told him he was brilliant, and worked double shifts at a copywriting agency to pay their rent while he studied. She had loved him unconditionally, and he had traded her for a woman who loved his trajectory. Karma wasn't just a concept. It was a breathing, living entity, and it wore a charcoal Alexander McQueen suit. Desperation was a bitter, metallic taste in Ronan's mouth. It had been 3 days since Alara left. The penthouse was filled with cardboard boxes. He had to pack. He had to figure out a legal strategy. He had to find a new firm willing to take on a radioactive pariah. But he couldn't focus. He was paralyzed by the realization of how deeply he had miscalculated everything. He needed leverage. He needed something, anything, to force Sable to call off the corporate hounds. That evening, as a heavy thunderstorm rolled off Lake Michigan, Ronan drove his Porsche to Oak Park. The affluent, quiet suburban streets were a jarring contrast to the neon chaos of the city. He pulled up to the driveway of the classic 4-bedroom colonial house. His house. The one he had so generously allowed Sable to keep in the divorce. The house was dark. Sable wasn't here. Why would she be? She probably had a compound in Connecticut and a penthouse in Manhattan. Ronan walked up to the front door, the rain soaking through his jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his old key. He hadn't returned it. It slid into the lock, and the door clicked open. Stepping inside felt like walking into a mausoleum. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The house was perfectly clean, perfectly preserved, exactly as he had left it. The oatmeal throw blanket she loved was draped over the sofa. The bookshelf was lined with the classic literature she adored. Ronan felt a sharp ache in his chest, a ghost limb sensation of a life he had voluntarily amputated. He ignored it. He wasn't here to reminisce. He was here to survive. He walked down the hall to Sable's home office. It was a small room, tucked away, filled with a heavy oak desk and walls of filing cabinets. If there was anything to find, evidence of corporate espionage, hidden offshore accounts she had used while they were married, anything illegal, it would be here. He began rummaging through the unlocked drawers. Nothing but old freelance copywriting invoices and grocery receipts. He moved to the filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer was locked with a heavy padlock. Ronan's heart accelerated. This was it. He grabbed a heavy metal paperweight from the desk and brought it down hard on the padlock. Clang. Twice more, and the cheap lock snapped open. He pulled the drawer open. Inside were neat manila folders. Not corporate secrets, not espionage. They were labeled with years, going back to the very beginning of their relationship. Ronan pulled out the oldest folder. Year 1. He opened it. Inside were bank statements from a shell corporation called Aegis Holdings. He frowned, flipping through the pages. There were transfer receipts. Transfer, $45,000. Recipient, Vanguard Acquisitions Seed Fund. Memo, Anonymous Angel Investment. R. Vance. Ronan froze. He stared at the line. 5 years ago, his first major acquisition pitch had almost failed due to lack of capital. At the 11th hour, an anonymous angel investor had wired the exact amount needed, launching his career. He had always bragged that his brilliance had attracted invisible money. He pulled out the next folder. Year 3. Transfer, $12,000. Recipient, the Chicago Executive Club. Memo, Membership Initiation Fee, R. Vance. He had thought the club had waived his fee based on his merit. He frantically pulled out folder after folder. Receipts for his Tom Ford suits, routed through a promotional lottery. Payments that covered his catastrophic trading loss in his 3rd year, masked as a market correction dividend. The truth hit Ronan with the force of a freight train. He wasn't a self-made man. He had never been a self-made man. Every time he stumbled, every time his arrogance outpaced his ability, Sable had quietly, invisibly, reached into her empire and paved the road in front of him. She had dressed in thrift store clothes and played the role of the quiet wife so he could feel like the conquering king. She had built his ego. She had built his career. He dropped the folders onto the floor, his hands shaking violently. He fell to his knees amidst the scattered papers. The illusion of his brilliance, the core of his identity, shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. He was a fraud, a puppet who thought he was pulling his own strings. Suddenly, the silence of the house was broken by the sharp, shrill ring of the landline phone on the desk. Ronan flinched. He stared at the phone. It rang again, and again. Slowly, his hand trembling, he reached up and lifted the receiver to his ear. "Did you find what you were looking for, Ronan?" Sable's voice was crystal clear, cold as absolute zero. She wasn't asking a question. She was delivering a verdict. She had known he would come here. She had left the files for him to find. Ronan couldn't speak. A sob tore its way out of his throat, raw and agonizing. "Sable, I didn't know." "No, you didn't," she replied softly. "You thought you were the architect of your own greatness. I just wanted you to see the blueprints before I tear the building down completely." "Why did you do it?" Ronan wept, gripping the phone like a lifeline. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" "Because I wanted to see who you would become when you thought you had power, Ronan. And now we both know. You're exactly the man you chose to be." The line crackled faintly. "Leave the key on the counter when you go. The demolition crews arrive tomorrow to bulldoze the property." The line went dead. Ronan sat in the dark, surrounded by the paper receipts of his own manufactured existence, as the thunder rattled the windows of the house he was about to lose forever. The absolute devastation. Ronan didn't just lose the company, his fiancée, and his penthouse. He just lost his entire identity, discovering that his self-made success was entirely funded by the wife he discarded is a psychological blow he may never recover from. But Sable isn't finished yet. The demolition of the Oak Park house is just the physical manifestation of what she intends to do to Vanguard acquisitions. How will Ronan survive when every door is slammed in his face? Will he find a way to strike back, or will he be forced to beg for mercy? Hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to catch part 3, where the corporate warfare reaches a boiling point. What did you think of Ronan's discovery? Let us know in the comments.